no commercial and no political interest should stand in the way of the truth. That would be the antithesis of all that I stood for in journalism.
That was Harry's greatest achievement, I think, to change British law in favour of press freedom, in favour, give more power to the powerless.
The task of editing is to be anything, it is to edit text. If it's to sign expense sheets, I don't want to do it.
Sir Harry really encapsulated that fearlessness. It's what he did. It is what he was. And to pick up from Tina, journalism is under assault in a way that we haven't seen for a long time. And the question that we're asking today is how to stay fearless against those threats. We don't have the Pope up here. But we have the next best thing, frankly. Four giants of the industry, a ridiculously high-flying panel to try and help us navigate some of the questions that we are all asking continuously throughout our daily jobs. Emma Tucker is the editor of the Wall Street Journal, which is bucking the trend now with a 20% increase in overall subscriptions, including print, since she took over in 2023. Christiane Amanpour, CNN's chief international anchor, whose career has made courage in the field virtually synonymous with her own name. Patrick Radden Keefe, one of the most relentless investigative storytellers of our time, author of many acclaimed books. His latest Sunday Times bestseller is London Falling. And Katharine Viner, editor-in-chief of The Guardian, the longest-serving female editor in Fleet Street history, and says the definition of a good journalist is somebody who's relentless and never gives up. And Kath probably herself is feeling that at the moment, coming straight off the back of a speech talking about the question of how reality itself is under threat and feeling fake. Let me start with you, Emma. What is the greatest threat to your work at the moment? This is a question I'll ask to each of you.
Okay, I'll be brief, but I've got three. I think, well, first of all, I'd say, you know, the press in America is doing a fantastic job. It's still free. It's still doing what it needs to do. But the first problem is the environment in which we're operating is becoming much more challenging. It's getting much, much harder to do the kind of journalism that we're talking about today. Right. The second thing is trust. The sort of cratering of trust in established media is something that's a problem for all of us, and it's on all of us to solve that. And the third issue facing us all is how do you monetize news in a world of AI when everything's being disintermediated and producing the kind of journalism that we're talking about today is very, very expensive.
Christiane, you're on the front line. You're facing out. What is the greatest threat for you?
Well, in addition to what Emma says, I would say, social media, the weaponization of the truth, the lack of trust in the truth, the lack of trust in institutions, the future, as you say, of us actually being able to survive in this medium, digitization, how do you monetize, etc. And then I would say, just like in the field, when you're confronting leaders who simply want to kill the messenger and do not want to hear the truth, right, and you're operating in their backyard, you're physically under threat, you're physically unable to do the story. Often you're injured, you're imprisoned, you're killed, and this is a fact. They just said the statistics for last year. And now in the democratic world, I'm talking about the authoritarian world out there, the wild west or east or whatever. Now in the democratic world, we're under unacceptable threat by leaders who will talk about, who believe that we are there simply to be sycophants and megaphones and bolster them, and they do not like when we actually report the truth. I happen to believe there is a truth. It's based on facts and evidence. And there is a truth. It's not fungible. And I think that we have to understand and accept that it is not our job to be liked by any leader, not a democratic leader, not an authoritarian leader. It's our job to serve the people and to speak truth to power. And that is what happens, especially in the United States, through the press. We're accountable. The president is accountable to the people through us. That's our job, the fourth estate. Period, end of story.
This obviously gets harder as I go round, because I'm sure you agree with what the first two have said. You could just say here. What would you add, Patrick?
I mean, I agree with all of that. I think that to back up a bit, and you've picked up on some strains of this, to me, the biggest threat is a sort of in some ways, a more subtle one, which is this idea of the assault on reality itself, just a kind of uncanniness to our existence these days. I think some of this is accentuated by political leaders who have, obviously demonized the press and sort of raised this notion that everything is kind of a he said, she said, subjective situation. I think some of it is technological, and we see that both with these kind of algorithmic communities that pull people deeper and deeper into one way of seeing the world or another. But I think increasingly we see it with AI. I'm sure some of you as well get, half of the email I get these days, I can tell there's a kind of uncanniness to what I'm reading, and it just has a sort of slippery quality. And what I worry about is that that's going to make people just start to sort of doubt the sense that there is any kind of tangible reality out there. What I would say for people in this room is that we need to embrace the idea not just that truth is a kind of defendable philosophical principle, but also that truth is a process. It's a way of doing your job and showing your work. And I think that we have to kind of defend that as an idea moving forward, and that hopefully with a kind of like-minded community of people trying to do this work with integrity and hold power to account, we can defend these principles that have, they've gotten us this far.
Yeah, I mean, 20 years ago, Kath, we wouldn't have been talking about one of the biggest threats being questioning reality itself, right?
Yeah, so that was, as you kindly mentioned, this speech, which we published as a long read in the Guardian today, which is sort of saying, if we used to talk about fake news, but now reality itself feels fake. And I think that has big challenges for news organizations, but it also does have big opportunities because, if we stay committed to the truth and not fall into the trap of AI slop, then I think, we can differentiate ourselves and show our value in society. But the challenge also at the same time of authoritarianism, as of last year, more people in the world live in autocracies than democracies for the first time in many decades. And obviously there's, even in democracies like the US, there's the erosion of democratic norms, and that always leads to people to go after the press. I think those challenges coming at the same time are uniquely difficult.
I want to talk about the scoop, because that's a moment where you actually feel that you are challenging the establishment and you are getting results. Emma, you've had an extraordinary year for the Wall Street Journal. You broke the story of Epstein's birthday book, just to remind people Trump's contribution within it, he denied. Can you just take us inside some of that process? I know it's still under legal wraps, and this is going to put parameters around what you can say, but just the process, how does it go from being an inkling, being a source, being an idea, to something that actually lands on the page, that you sign off as editor and say, I'm happy?
Well, the inkling bit is almost the worst bit, because it'll be when you get wind of the fact that this story is coming your way, at which point, as Kath will know, you're like, oh God, I'm about to enter a whole world of pain here. And it was. But I mean, what I can say about that story was it's a really good example of why the kind of journalism that we all are that we're all endeavoring to keep alive and focus on is challenged, because it took an awfully long time. It took a huge amount of resources.
Can you tell us? Can you give us a time frame or a number of people?
Numbers of people. If you take in all the editors, all the reporters, and then the legal team and the standards editor, it was at least a team of 20, if not more. And these are, very experienced, well-paid journalists. And I think the whole process must have taken well over 6 months. My point is, in a world of AI, these are the stories we have to be focusing on, the ones that tell people something they didn't know, the ones that truly sort of move the dial on a conversation. And this one triggered a whole host. It sort of led to the sort of, the pressure that, because we didn't just do the first story, we did the second story. We ran towards the fire after we'd published the first one. These stories require a huge amount of effort, resources, and legal expertise. They are very, very expensive. You have to have deep pockets and a stiff backbone to do stories like this.
And as you publish, are you expecting the reaction that you got from Trump? I mean, do you have your legal team literally lined up waiting for the incoming fire?
I think it was inevitable that there was going to be a strong response, and there was. But, this is the challenge. I mean, interestingly, I would say one of the biggest challenges to us now isn't so much what happens afterwards, it's what happens before you even publish.
Right.
And that is a massive challenge for us. So what's happening now in America, I mean, I think British journalists are probably used to this with injunctions and slaps and all the rest of it. But increasingly it is the case that before you even get to publication, lawsuits come raining down on you. A sort of a whole torrent of legal letters come your way, and the lawyers are using these deep-pocketed people are doing this as a PR strategy, because then other journalists then write up, oh look, so-and-so is suing the Wall Street Journal for some reporting that they're doing. They haven't even published the story, so they can then point to it. It can't be true. Other journalists write the story up. And it's and then guess what? Everybody gets tied up. The lawyers are busy. The reporter's working on the story. Instead of working on the story, they're having to deal with the lawyers. It's also the case that a lot of stories that used to get dismissed by courts no longer get dismissed. So we then get caught up in, answering the questions that are
previous publishers.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, the point is that the Trump story sort of epitomized how difficult and expensive these stories are, but at least the defamation came after we'd published. These days, increasingly, we're getting legally challenged before we even get to publication.
And Kath, Trump recently dropped his defamation claim against The Guardian, and The Guardian also won a lengthy libel lawsuit against Noel Clarke. I guess these are not just victories in their own right. They must give a sort of ballast of confidence to the paper to go on and do the next thing, right?
Yeah, yes. I mean, with the Noel Clarke, that was 6 weeks in the High Court. All of our journalists put on the stand for days on end. And it was just, you could see the reporting was so good. The work they'd done was so unbelievably thorough. Every source was, not just fact checked, but can you tell us someone you can talk to? Can you show us WhatsApp from the time? It was so unbelievably well done that I really thought it would be an absolute outrage if we lost. But still, it was 6 weeks of our time, actually 2 years of our time preparing.
And are you nervous as the editor, or do you say, this is watertight, I can leave them to it?
I mean, you don't leave them to it, no. But I think,
in terms of the worrying.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think this is where actually the Guardian's ownership was really helpful. So we're owned by a trust. We're not owned by, a billionaire owner or shareholders saying just settle and make it go away. They're saying if you think you want to stand up for the journalism, you should stand up for the journalism. And so I think our ownership really helped us, and then I felt very encouraged to do so. But we did put a lot on the line. You know, at one point he was asking for a lot of money.
Yeah. Patrick, we were on stage together last night, and you said the only people that ever sue me are the rich, or the only people that threaten me, you said, are the rich, right? So this all comes from a position of power, trying to shut down whatever they can.
Yeah, no question. I mean, this was in response to a question about my book and some of the gangsters that I've been dealing with, and how safe or unsafe I felt. And I said the irony is, with all the gangsters and drug lords that I've written about over the years, the only people who threaten to sue me or who threaten me at all really are the billionaires. And I feel as though we should acknowledge, right, that each of us up here is speaking to you from the position as a kind of representative of relatively powerful media institutions on the landscape. I mean, I'm sort of encouraged to hear you talk about the kind of backbone and the fight that you're putting into it. And I do think that it's important that we sort of have that spirit of fight, but we also have to concede that there are freelance journalists, there are small media organizations, there are startups, there are people trying to do reporting in other countries where the legal protections are not necessarily as robust as they are here. I don't know exactly what the answer is, but I do think that some of it is actually a sense of kind of camaraderie and esprit de corps among the kinds of people who are in this room. I think about my wife who's here. Justina Gadzowska runs an investigative nonprofit, The Sentry, which does terrific work on the financing of conflict and on illicit finance. And we were at a party in New York a few weeks ago. And there was a particularly noxious law firm, which I won't name, which is really in the business of sending the kind of legal letters that you're talking about. And I had a kind of quite intense epistolary relationship with a lawyer at this law firm for several years when I was writing a book about the Sacklers. And my wife, who's recently just launched a big investigation with the Sentry, had just recently received a letter from the same firm. And she was talking to a friend of ours who's a lawyer, and she said, "Oh, it's funny, now I'm getting legal letters from the same firm." And this guy said, "Relationship goals." And I thought, this is the spirit that we need to have, as we kind of march into this. We need to do it sort of, in a spirit of competition, but also in a sense of solidarity.
But that is the key, isn't it? Because it should be maybe one for all and all for one, but that's not how we work in the media. And there are really obvious examples now when a female journalist gets called piggy, or when somebody is shouted down in a White House press room. I mean, everyone should walk out. We don't, right?
Well, so that's my view. I mean, I've said in many public forums that it should be like the NATO Article 5. Let's not mention Trump degrading that, but it is all for one or one for all. And I believe in a public environment, like if you're invited into the White House or into the Pentagon or into the Oval Office or in all those places, there is a contract. You're not just there to be slavish, you're there to actually do your job and challenge respectfully, professionally, what is happening. And once it gets personal and vindictive and unacceptable, I do think there's a polite way to say these are not the workroom conditions that we expect. In any other corporation, you would be taken to the employment tribunal. I mean, seriously, what? It's not okay. And I have publicly said that many, many times. I've stood up for my female colleagues. Very fortunately, it hasn't happened to me in my job, even though I've been confronted with some of the worst monsters on the planet. They have not gone personal. And even I once challenged President Clinton. I'm not a White House correspondent. I'm not a US anchor. I don't get to interview sitting presidents. But once I interviewed from Sarajevo in a press conference, a global press conference, President Clinton. And I was listening to what he said. He was trying to get reelected. It was a foreign policy conversation. And then there was some questions. CNN choose me. The entire CNN high command was sitting there. It was live at CNN. There was Clinton, huge face of those of us on this big screen. And I basically asked him why his policy over Bosnia, this is 1994, was constantly flip-flopping, and why he was picking the agenda of the Serbs, who had an agenda as they were slaughtering the Bosnian Muslims in Sarajevo. And he got very angry. I mean, his face went really red, and he said to me, "There have been no constant flip-flops, madam." And I'm like, oh my God, I'm not going to survive this. But to his credit, he was not vindictive. He didn't stand there and punch back at me and punch down, and nor did my bosses. Each and every one of them apparently went white And then they said, okay, you did a good job. They probably thought they were going to get penalized. And they didn't. And I think that's really important to be supported by our leaders, because freedom of the press is not just on us. It's on all our leaders as well. They have to support us. They have to. So all of these lawsuits and all the rest of it, because those bringing them often are frivolous, as you know, and they're designed to chill. It's called the chilling effect. They're designed to pre-censor us in many ways. As long as we're truthful, as long as we have the facts, as long as we've done our real, proper job as journalists, we have to stand up to it, like all these people are.
I agree. I totally agree. But I think we also have to look at our own behaviour before we get too self-satisfied. And I mean, I was really proud of the stuff we did on Epstein and Trump. But, as journalists and as news organisations, we have to show that we're not picking an agenda. And the year before, we had done the story about Biden being too old for the job. And I was genuinely shocked that when we published that story, I had messages from other people in the US media saying, we don't understand how you could do that story. So it felt like
we did it.
We did it, but the rest of the press were very ambivalent about the story. So my point is, we have to show that we don't have an agenda, that we are observers, we're not participants, and that we are there to do our job. And I think part of the trust issue is that we have to show we're willing to do...
It's called being a journalist.
Yes,
truthful,
exactly.
not neutral.
Yeah.
We have to cover all sides of the story, and that doesn't mean taking sides.
Kath, do you think British journalists would have a different approach to the White House journalists? I mean, there was a memorable moment with Dominic Cummings in 10 Downing Street, where he tried to filter off the ones he allowed to stay and the ones he didn't. And I think, to their credit, most of them walked out. Right?
Yeah, I am quite confused by it and quite surprised. And people tell me that it's because there's a pool and there's pool reporters are doing the job for everyone else. But I just think as a collective, why not just stand up and work out? I think, though, isn't it true that in the briefing room, they've now got, he's put so many kind of far-right bloggers and influencers and so on that it wouldn't be everybody. Lots of people would stay, and so then you'd just be taking yourself out of the accountability
That's the risk, isn't it?
forum.
That you walk out and nobody else comes out.
But I don't know why they don't. The piggy and so on. I don't know why you wouldn't just walk out.
Can I just have one thing, though? I mean, is there not a slightly awkward wrinkle here? And I had this thought a week or two ago when the White House Correspondents' Dinner happened. And you had all of these people from news organizations going to this dinner, which at this point has just become kind of a parody. And then hilariously, in some cases, going to the dinner and sort of explaining it away and saying, oh, it's important for sources and so on. Of course, I find it all a bit gross, but I need to be there to cultivate sources. And maybe we should just cancel the whole thing. But as long as it's going on, I really should be there. And I think part of what we should acknowledge is that Trump has, in some respects, been very good for business. That these enterprises, which are in the business of getting clicks and selling subscriptions and so on and so forth, have found that the Trump administration makes great copy, and sometimes it's outrage copy. But you have these two things that are kind of in tension, right? Where on the one hand, you want to hold power to account, and on the other hand, this is like the most entertaining show on earth. This is a reality TV presidency that has kind of turned politics into entertainment by other means. And I think, listen, I don't know that there's any news organization that has figured out how to thread that needle, but I do think it's a kind of a third rail that we need to acknowledge, is that there is a kind of sense that you want to sort of to be there, to be in the room, in part because you need to keep the organization going.
Off, though? It turns a lot of people off Trump as well at the same time, as well as being kind of addictive and sort of what's he said now. I think lots of people are turning off from politics and turning off from...
I also think we make way too much about who's in the pool, who's got access to the White House. When did a good story, in what I would call a good story, ever come out of a White House press briefing? And in fact, when I was at the Sunday Times, we had an excellent political reporter who got kicked out of the lobby because he upset Dominic Cummings. I can't remember what it was. I've never got better stories out of him because he wasn't going there.
He wasn't in the same place as
he
everyone
had
else.
to go out and do some reporting. It was like, so I think we are at risk of getting a little caught up in.
Heaven forbid you pick up the phone.
Yeah, really.
But I think we all know that no journalist is going to turn down the White House dinner next year just in case. Christiane, can I talk to you? We just started to touch on corporate ownership, which does seem to me quite an important strand of the whole fear question. Pete Hegseth, the world's favourite frat boy supremo, has said that the sooner David Ellison owns CNN, the better. And CNN has become this sort of lightning rod, hasn't it, for this administration? Does it change what you do? Do you fear what is coming at you now in terms of a change of...
Clearly I'm concerned, and I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to say about a corporate thing that's underway, but I am obviously, as a person, as a journalist with a record, concerned. And I'm concerned based on what's happened to the other things that he's taken over already, like CBS News, right? I mean, do I have to list what's happening there? I mean, hemorrhaging viewers, probably hemorrhaging money, this ideological realignment of CBS and the destruction potentially of 60 Minutes, one of the literally the legacy. I mean, nobody can match 60 Minutes for a brilliant television, magazine, show that's been doing hard news and cultural news and for decades and decades. Top-rated, top moneymaker for the network, in any event, all of that. So clearly, obviously, I'm concerned. I would like to think that we would have the very basic, which is editorial independence. I'm hoping for that. I know many of us at CNN are incredibly, including leadership, are very, very committed to that, clearly, and I don't think I need to say more than that. I do also think that I would question the business about Trump ratings boost now, and I'd like to ask, because I don't know the total figures, but certainly in 1.0, he jacked up everybody's ratings and everybody's profit margins, certainly CNN's. I'm not sure that that's the case right now. What's happening right now is the Iran war, the Venezuela intervention, actual news events are jacking up our ratings and our visibility and our relevance and our importance, which I'm still incredibly committed to, obviously, because CNN, Ted Turner, 46 years ago, June 1st, created a media revolution precisely to sort of get rid of all the special interests, precisely to be the sort of man in the middle and not have an agenda and just go and tell the stories from all over the world. And I learned from him in the first Gulf War of 1990 that we actually must cover all sides of the stories. The problem with us is now we are being weaponized by leaders in the United States, by leaders all over the world. But he said, you have to be in Baghdad. When the White House was saying, don't have your people in Baghdad, Ted, we're going to, kill them probably. And he said, no, volunteer. We have to tell all sides of the story, whether we're in behind enemy lines or not. And I want to say one more thing. The fact that Israel prevents us from going to Gaza is indefensible on every single level. So that's another threat to being able to tell the truth. Sure.
Just this question of corporate ownership, because Wall Street Journal is Murdoch-owned. How much is he a presence in your newsroom? I mean, it's a very confusing relationship that he has with Trump now, post sort of defamation suit payout and all the rest of it. And clearly he's got the appetite to support the Wall Street Journal on its Epstein coverage and more.
The Wall Street Journal newsroom is an independent newsroom. That's enshrined in the status it has when Murdoch bought the Journal. The decisions to publish are mine.
Yeah. So he doesn't. Do you run any of those by him? Would you go to him with the?
Thank you.
It's fundamental.
Yeah. No. I mean, obviously, conversations happen, but that's normal in any organisation. You don't. Especially if you're doing something risky that might end up in a massive, great lawsuit.
Yeah.
You're going to have conversations, but the decisions to publish are mine.
And Kathy, you are independently owned. There is no backstop for you, presumably. I mean, who is the person that watches your back?
Well, it's the trust as a whole. I honestly think it is the best ownership model you could have as an editor. Because they can't tell you what to do in any way, shape, or form. And I mean, I'm sure I absolutely believe everything Emma says. But I mean, there is something unique about the Guardian's ownership structure, which is very, very liberating.
Can I ask you something? I think it's probably worth recognising that, as you said, Patrick, everyone up on the stage has, dare I say, decades of experience behind them. And there'll be people maybe sort of starting out in journalism for the first time and saying, well, it's all right for you guys. You've fought this, or you can be ugly, or you can shout about this. But maybe we should just explore that horrible moment of self-censorship in a time in your career when you did sort of think, dare I, or am I going to? Or you recognize the seeds of what it feels like to pull away from a story. And what happened? I don't know if you... Who's brave enough to kick us off? Does anyone recognize what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Go on.
Well, ask Patrick first, because it's your turn to talk. Do you have a story?
That's not how you volunteer, Christiane, just to point that out, okay? I
Patrick's
volunteered
the
this
honorary
guy.
woman on this.
I was going
incredible
to say the gender imbalance on these panels is really outrageous.
It's very balanced.
I guess my point is there will be young people sort of starting off in their careers
Well,
saying...
I was that person. So
Right.
I was a freelancer for years before I was full-time at The New Yorker. And it wasn't a situation where I self-censored. And I should say that even as a freelancer, I enjoyed, all the kind of editorial protections writing for The New Yorker that a staff writer would. I will say that when I mentioned earlier getting all those letters from lawyers, these letters are designed to intimidate. There are these firms that are now making a big business out of sending these letters before a piece has even been published. When I was working on my book about the Sacklers, my wife will chuckle hearing this. We got what's called a litigation hold, which essentially says, listen, we're planning on suing you, and when we do, you need to retain all of the documents that you have, so you can't throw anything away now and potentially indefinitely, because if you do, it'll be destruction of evidence in the eventual lawsuit that we bring. And like when you live in a small house and you're compiling a lot of files,
That's a threat in its own
becomes
right.
a housekeeping hazard, if nothing else. But what I would often think about and often do, I've been with the same publisher for 20 years, I've been with the same magazine for 20 years, is what happens to the person who's earlier in their career? What happens to the person who this is their first freelance piece? What happens to the independent journalist? Or the kind of the equivalent of an alt weekly or a brand new magazine. When they get a letter from one of these firms, I think very often they are intimidated. They have to be, right? I mean, it would be sort of irresponsible for them not to think about what the consequences of such a lawsuit would be. The frustration is, I know with these firms that the ratio of letters written to actual lawsuits brought, I mean, this is a letter writing business. These people are getting paid by the word as much as the journalists are to write these letters,
That's a story that you should publish.
And that presumably
We give
gets
people
worse
hope.
in an age of AI lawyers, right? Where you can send everything you want.
Absolutely, you just kind of fire hose this stuff out. And I think that's what worries me is I often meet young journalists, aspiring journalists, students who are studying journalism. And I want to tell them, have faith, have heart. There's got to be a way that we can push this thing through. And yet at the same time, we all speak from a position of privilege here, and you don't want to kind of make it look too easy. I mean, the reality is this is hard.
So let us end by turning this on its head. We've talked about the difficulties of confronting this sort of journalism. What about the difficulties of not being fearless? Because that's kind of the end of our trade, isn't it, Kath?
Yeah, it's what we exist to do. It's what we're here for.
I mean, are there experiences where you can see things taking a nosedive if that fearlessness goes?
Oh, totally. And also, it's what people are willing... I hate to be sort of commercial about it, but people aren't going to pay for news. When knowledge is a commodity, which it is now, and you can find out anything just by typing into a large language model, we have to be telling people things they don't know. So if anything, I think the kind of journalism of the future is going to be much more that there's this sort of investigations, on-the-ground reporting, exclusive analysis. That has to be what we're doing, or people are simply not going to pay us.
Right.
It's all the things that AI can't do. AI
Yeah.
can't do those things. It can't really talk
Yeah.
to people, not in an intimate, thoughtful, deep way. It can't go to places. It can't find things out. It
Knock
can't
on
hold the
doors.
powerful to account.
And I
it
would
doesn't
just
want
say
to.
it's always been thus. To all the young people who are out there, we've always been hammered by power. Its question is how do we respond? And we must keep our spine, and we must not fold, because, as you say, that's what they pay us for. But I would say in terms of life and death, we have to keep being fearless. I always say that the fact that we were in Bosnia for all those years of the war under ethnic cleansing and genocide, we told the story, and eventually it did bring a humanitarian intervention that stopped it. I believe the press was very responsible in including a pre-intervention in Kosovo the year later. By contrast, when we weren't in Rwanda and 1 million people were slaughtered in 1 to 3 months, That is the absolute bottom line for me. We have to stay fearless. We have to be there. We have to be the eyes and ears.
Christiane, Emma, Patrick, Kath, thank you all very much indeed. Thanks for listening.